start with roll call on you.
Right, yeah. Kiddos.
Living the
okay.
dream. Yeah, we're still recovering. We spent a week in Disney.
Oh my
I'm pretty sure it's going to take me a month and a half to recover from that.
All right, we're live.
Live? Perfect. All right, we're going to get the October 17, 2019 RCDC meeting called to order. If we start roll call with David, please.
David Smith, present.
Harry O'Cambry.
Mike Dyson.
Becky Kittleman?
Josh McKay.
Pat Sheehan.
Charlie Zek.
Right, and we will kick off with the consent agenda, which is, the only item on there is discussion of possible action on the minutes. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion on consent agenda.
Motion to pass the consent agenda?
Can I?
Yes, you can.
Second.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so we've got that. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Consent agenda minutes adopted. Regular agenda, presentation and status update of the commercial corridor analysis from the retail coach.
All right. Well, it's good to be here. For those, I think I've met most of you now, but for those of you that don't know me, Aaron Farmer, president of the Retail Coach. We were hired by the RCDC several months ago. Can't remember the exact date, but really with the focus, the strategy to look at the two corridors here in Rollingwood. Obviously, main corridor through town, but also looking at Mopac and the small amount of frontage you have there. So what I want to do today is just kind of give you a little bit of background on that, a little bit of background on why this happened, why we did this, and then some of the strategies, some of the things that we put together, and some recommendations. So as I go, feel free to ask me if there's any questions. So the first thing we wanted to do, if you'll remember, is we wanted to understand the market and understand it from really a development standpoint. So I say retail, but really anything that's bringing consumers here to Rollingwood. So in order to do that, it's kind of scary to think about, but nowadays there's a lot more technology out there. In the past, we would say how many people live within a 2-mile radius, a 3-mile radius of Rollingwood, and just with technology getting better and better, we're doing a number of different things now to do that. So the first thing we did was we ran a cell phone analysis, and we've run this on a number of different areas in town. So the one that you're looking at on the screen here is the shops at Mira Vista, and I will tell you, because of the lack of cell service in this community, this was not the easiest analysis to run, but we got it done. And so looking at shops at Mira Vista, what this tells us is, this tells us who's shopping, who's eating in that shopping center, who's coming here, who's driving in. So what you'll see on the screen here, it's obviously a map of the kind of the immediate area here. The darker the red on the map, the higher the concentration of consumers that are coming to shop here on a yearly basis. So what we've done is, for the last 12 months, is we've really had our focus on this area, and for 12 months we've run this cell phone analysis. So based off of this, we're able to tell where people are coming from, where they originate from, what their home location is, and what their work location is also. But we're able to really define it by some specific metrics. So not only where they're coming from, but how many people are shopping at this specific shopping center. So for example here, you've got about 167,000 consumers that have shopped at the shops at Mira Vista in the last 12 months. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about 460,000 visits. So basically, you're getting multiple visits by consumers that are shopping there. We also can track it by day and by week. So it's hard to see on the screen here now, but basically what this shows us is where people came from, or what dates they were there to shopping there. So we've got a lot of data. I don't have it on the screen here. I don't have it on the presentation, but we're also able to track people and where. So if they shop at the shops at Mira Vista, we can track, did they go to the doctor's office down the street? Did they go across the street to eat there, come back to shop? So we're able to track that information. So from a retail market analysis information, very, very powerful. So we ran that on multiple locations in and around the corridor there, just to see where people were coming from. But we also ran it on the park, and I wanted to just kind of share this with you. But Rollingwood Park obviously has a pretty good draw. People are coming in to utilize that park from really the immediate area. Kyle Kofer, for example, who was here with me last time for the presentation and who worked on this project, he lives in some apartments just kind of right across Mopac and works at our office. And him and his girlfriend bring their dog here. They come here on a regular basis to Rollingwood Park. So it's getting utilization. It's being utilized by people outside of Rollingwood. So what this showed us here is where most of those consumers are coming from. So again, red, the highest concentration. When you see blue or green, these are just a few visits coming from these areas, but you can tell you have a pretty good draw area there. What was interesting about the park was you've got about 8.6 thousand consumers, or 8.6 thousand people that use that park over that 12-month period.
You mean those are unique?
Unique visits,
okay.
yeah. So that was interesting to me to see that, and we've got information that we'll share with everyone that goes deep into where they're coming from, how many times they utilized it. Really information there. But those are 8.6 or 8,600 unique visits, making roughly 35,000 visits.
Unique visitors, right?
Unique visitors.
Question.
Yes,
So that's visitors with cell phones.
it is. But
That's correct.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
people that visit without cell phones.
there will, but very few. Yeah,
Well, so just to emphasize, right, like any number of folks might bring their kids or,
Sure.
or whoever else. So maybe the parents
yeah,
show up with the kids.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Is it what we can safely say is
There's at
that
least that.
is
We
that
can say,
no
yeah.
no less than 8,600 unique visitors visit our
Absolutely,
park in a
and
year.
that's a good way to put it. And if you're running through the park, say you don't have your cell phone or something like that, you're obviously not being tracked. But we feel like it's a large enough sample size
Yeah.
to get an understanding of where they're coming from.
And sorry, you said those 8,600 unique visitors make approximately how many? visits?
36,000 visits.
Approximately 36,000.
Yeah, so we're getting multiple uses of the park by these individual users.
It's a lot of use
It really is.
Okay.
So thought that was
For-
interesting.
for a town with less than 2,000 residents.
Absolutely. So what that goes to show me is, and it goes with the shopping centers as well. You've got your trade area is larger than your city population.
Right.
So that's really the way to look at that. So this new cell phone data, this information is how we utilize, how we come up with market analysis information. Now it's a lot more accurate than, again, a radial, a drive time, computer models, those sort of things. So also what I want to show you from that standpoint, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here so you can see it, but we've defined a couple of trade areas. So we defined a primary trade area for Rollingwood, and we also defined a secondary trade area. So the primary trade area are those consumers that are shopping, eating, utilizing the park, for example, in Rollingwood on a regular basis, so multiple times per week. What that looks like, and I'm gonna have to zoom out just a little bit so I can see it again. But what that looks like is about 28,564 people make up your retail trade area. So just over 28,500 that utilize your services here, utilize the businesses that are here. Very high incomes. Your average household income is $211,000 within that trade area. So comparatively to other markets we work throughout the greater Austin area, throughout the state, that's obviously at the top of the top as far as incomes go. What was interesting to me is also looking at this primary. This mouse, there we go.
It doesn't really work for me. Roller bar probably is the roller ball is probably the easiest.
Okay. So just real quick, a little bit older population makes up this trade area. So we're looking at about 41.2 is the average, is the median age there. A little bit older population makes sense with the incomes we have in the immediate area and just knowing what we know about the trade area. However, I did notice that age is decreasing. So if you look at the surrounding area, it's decreasing on a pretty rapid basis. Fastest growing area, or fastest growing category from an age standpoint was millennials for this greater region. That's really consistent with the region here. So primary trade area was 28,564.
And just to be clear, so looking at this map for those that don't have it sitting in front of them, this map It also includes, I mean, we're talking a trade area that extends west beyond 360 into Lost Creek, almost the entirety of Westlake Hills. What is it? Out all the way south to 360 and
Yep.
Mopac, and then of course we jump a little bit over, but not significantly into the Barton Hills area.
Yeah, just a bit. Not that much.
And then we-
Pick up infield too.
And we pick up infield.
And you do.
Yeah, deep heading.
And what we have to look at when we're defining this trade area, obviously the cell phone analysis was a big driver for this,
Yeah.
but we're also looking at competition. Okay,
Yeah.
so where are your competing retail areas, where are your competing areas that people are shopping in? So that's kind of how we came up with this polygon. So that's the primary trade area, and then we looked at also as what we call it the retail trade area. It's really the secondary trade area. And this is a larger area of consumers that are not necessarily coming to Rollingwood on multiple visits. They're coming on the weekends, maybe once or twice every couple of weeks, maybe for work lunch or something like that. That's a little bit larger, or a good bit larger of a trade area, but about 109,142 make up that retail trade area there. Makes sense. Your income's decreased a little bit because we're expanding that trade area out into some not low income areas, but a little bit lower income than this immediate area. So 174,000 is the average household income, and also as we do that, your age decreases. So makes sense, but your age drops down to about 36. So some good information to have here. Understanding who your consumer is, where they're coming from, how they move throughout the community is one of the things we looked at. This is really just kind of scratching the surface of it. We have reports on all of this that go into, 40 pages worth of demographic information and diving into anything and everything you want to know about who's coming here. So that information will be helpful as y'all take on other economic development projects and those sort of things. And we'll be here along the way to kind of walk you through all of that. But I wanted to hit on those kind of main things to start with. So just continuing on here real quick, we also took a look at what we call a leakage analysis, or we call it a gap analysis. And we really wanted to understand what is the opportunity here. So obviously you have quite a bit of retail and restaurants in the immediate area that are frequented. If I try to come here for lunch, for example, it's hard to find a parking spot. Mm-hmm. So we know there is demand for retail and restaurants. What we did is we took that retail trade area and we identified what is the total potential. So in a perfect world, if those 109,000 people were shopping or eating in this area, your potential would be about 1.7 billion within that trade area. Well, if we look at actual sales, which you got from the state of Texas, within that area, we're doing about 1.2 billion in retail sales. So doing pretty well, but that still leaves us with a leakage. When I say leakage, that's money that's leaving that trade area. It's about 454 million that's leaving and that's on a yearly basis. So the way I tell you to look at that is don't look at leakage necessarily as a negative thing, but look at it from an opportunity standpoint. There's an opportunity to bring in, additional retail, additional restaurants. As some of these properties along the corridor we're going to look at turnover, there is opportunity here. So I won't go through all of this with you, but I'd encourage you to kind of take a look at it. There's different categories. Everything's broken into about 80 categories. Restaurants, for example. There's about $60 million in restaurant opportunity within this trade area that people are leaving and going other areas for, and a number of different categories worth looking at, again, if opportunities present themselves to recruit to the area.
So that's in the total area that you showed, though, not
That's
the city of Rollingwood.
That's in the total. That's in the total trade area.
Got it.
Yeah. So I wanted to point that out. Again, we've got literally hundreds of pages worth of the market analysis information. But the other big part of this process was the commercial corridor analysis strategy, and really taking a look at the corridors we talked about and really understanding with what's there now, are these sites serving their highest and best use? So that was the first thing we looked at. Again, here you can kind of see in blue here the corridor that we looked at. Basically BK's Road, and then also including Mopac, the church property, the small amount of property you have that's within the city limits on Mopac there. So we did a highest and best use analysis, and I will tell you, our team spent a lot of time in the market. I think total, we were here about 7 days, almost full days, looking at properties, driving the properties, talking to property owners, talking to business owners. We were looking at existing marketing, existing market conditions. We were looking at traffic counts and traffic patterns. We looked at sightline visibility to these shopping centers, sightline visibilities to different businesses as well, ingress, egress, adequate parking, topography of sites. Obviously, you have some topography issues along the corridor that impact your development opportunity. So we looked at all of those as we were looking at the highest and best use. We also did a zoning analysis. So we looked at, the staff here, team here was great at providing the current zoning on properties and really took a hard look at that. A lot of the zoning was done years back and maybe is not the right fit now based on some market changes and conditions and those sort of things. So you can kind of see the map there, the zoning map there. We looked at every property as well to really identify what those opportunities were. So I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But what we've done here, do I need to speak into the mic or can I walk over here? Will they be able to hear me on the?
You have a pretty projecting voice, we can see.
Is that okay? All right.
Yeah, I think you're.
I'm going to walk over here so I can kind of show you what we're looking at here. So what we've done is we put a site description in here. So every property that we analyze along that corridor, basically every individual property on the corridor. For example, Park Hills Baptist Church is one. Bee Cave Corner Office Building is another. We've got the site description in the first column here, and then we've got highest and best use. I will tell you, the majority of the sites within Rollingwood are not serving their highest and best use. A lot of those, I mean, that's, again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but if you look at current use, some of these businesses, some of these properties have been the same use for many of years. So what we've done is we've marked yes or no, whether they're serving their highest and best use. Obviously, like I said, many of those are no. And then we also included what the current zoning is. So the next column includes current zoning. For example, the Park Hills Baptist Church government and institutional district is the zoning for that one. If we look at the office center I talked about, planned unit development, some of the others are C1 and C2. So what we've done is we've gone through every single property and we've made our recommendation whether or not a zoning change is recommended. So I'm just going to take one out of here to use as an example. So for here, this is the office building next to Endeavor's new development that just kind of sits there by itself, has its own zoning. It's currently zoned as C1. Our recommendation is to change that zoning to PUD, so planned unit development, to tie it in with that overall development that basically is all around it. And the reason we recommend doing that is as that property turns over, as you have maybe new ownership take over some of these properties, which might not happen for 5 years, might not happen for 10 years, at least you're planning for the best situation there. I don't know how you want to do this, Mayor. Do you want me to go through every single one? Do you want to give them?
I don't think going through every single one is necessary unless any of the directors disagree. Just so that everybody knows, this is obviously available to you in digital format.
Can we get the staff to send it to us?
Yeah, has it been sent out?
No.
It's
Not
on
yet.
the website, in the packet.
Okay.
I think
No,
I forgot to.
It wasn't in the packet.
It's
As of today, it was a late
Okay.
edition.
I was gonna say, so I have it in the packet now, but I'll tell you, if it's not, I was gonna say, if it's not too much trouble, maybe just hit the email list.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what we've done is we've hit every single property
Okay.
in Rollingwood. That's besides the residential properties, basically.
Are you equipped, I mean, just looking at this very briefly, your recommendation is anything C1 to be upzoned to C2.
Right.
What's the rationale there rather than just changing to one commercial zone?
So, I mean, it all goes down to what you all want to do.
Okay.
Inevitably, at the end of this,
Sure.
You know, C2 is just a little bit. It distinguishes a little bit better some of the different zonings and what can be included or what can be accepted and what cannot be accepted. It's just a little bit deeper dive into that. But what I'll tell you here in a second. There are a lot of properties that are going through the corridor where you'll have C1 and then you'll have C2 and then you'll have C1 and you'll have C2 and there's not a big difference between the two if you really look at and read through the code like I did. So what my recommendation really would be to combine those and come up with one
One
commercial code.
To that end, sorry to interrupt
Sure.
you, but I know that our planning and zoning commission has recently decided to undertake an ambitious plan, a fantastic plan, but a comprehensive planning and zoning schema for the entire city.
Okay.
I'm assuming we're going to make this information available to all positions in the city, right, including planning and zoning. Would it be okay to assume that you'd be willing to come and talk
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
P&Z as well?
Yeah, we absolutely
Fantastic.
would. I think this is important. I think, times are changing, things are going to change, just like they have. Rollingwood looks different than what I remember it 35 years ago,
Sure.
obviously. But things are going to continue to change. It's important to really pay attention to that. Some of this zoning has been in place for many of years and just doesn't fit the current situation that you're in for a lot of these. So as you go through this, as you get this and go through it, feel free to let me know if there's any questions on this. We spent a lot of time on this. We've met with Amber and the mayor a couple of times, just kind of going through this, just to keep everyone up to speed on that. But that's what we looked at there. Just other comments are on this page as well. I split it into 2 slides. But for example, for some of these other properties here, like this Ruth Properties Shopping Center, although the center is not the highest and best use for the property, it will be hard to convince the shopping center owner to make any changes since the property is fully leased.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was interesting to me that I found through this process and talking to shopping center owners is, yes, most of your shopping centers have very low vacancy rates, if any vacancy. However, a lot of those tenants that are in there are on yearly leases, or in some cases on monthly leases. So there might be some opportunity if, let's say, somebody walks in the door next week and says, "Hey, we're looking for a location to lease." Could be a retailer, could be a restaurant, another type of use.
Mm-hmm.
There are opportunities for some of those in some of these centers. So just because they're leased, don't take that to mean that they're long-term leases that a lot of these tenants have.
So part of a takeaway there, if I'm reading between your lines, is
Yeah.
that if we were functioning as any number of other EDCs do, which is in a capacity to actually solicit and bring in new businesses into the community, there is opportunity for those businesses, I suppose.
Absolutely. So part of this highest and best use analysis, one of the things we looked at was your return on investment, right? And sales tax. You're driven by sales tax. This board is. So part of return on investment is, are you getting the most sales tax you can? And I will tell you, you're not. So looking at
how
some of
badly are we missing our mark there? Would you say significantly, or
I would say significantly. Yeah, absolutely. And being driven by sales tax, as most communities are, you're limited with there's not readily developable land to just continue to build out and those things. You're basically built out minus 1 or 2 very small properties. So paying attention to that sales tax, especially as we move forward, as y'all move forward as a community, as you get citizens and those that are wanting different amenities and those sort of things. Sales tax as an economic development corporation, which you'll hear about today, a lot of that is driven by sales tax. So I wanted to emphasize that. But what we've done is, again, every single property we've gone through, made our recommendations from a zoning standpoint. And then what I've also got to share with you are a couple other just kind of overall zoning recommendations. And I'm just going to kind of read through these to you real quick. There is very little consistency right now as it relates to zoning along Bee Caves Road. And that's pretty obvious. When I had that map up there showing the different colors, there's very little consistency.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
But is there a net benefit to consistency? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, absolutely. I think if you look at just your overall development and redevelopment plans as you go forward, it makes things a lot easier. So I like to hear that your planning and zoning is going to take this up again. Consistency is good in just about anything. Being able to, even for your city staff, instead of having to, look back the history and try to figure things out. Why is this property versus having just a consistent code throughout just makes sense.
Thank you.
So, consider one recommendation we made is to consider removing the hospital district zoning classification completely from your list of zoning options. As we talked to the Planning and Zoning Commission, I would say the same thing. With the lack of developable property here in Rollingwood, this zoning option is just it's not applicable to what we're dealing with here. In case the properties that are currently zoned H1 ever are sold, which they have, a couple of them have changed hands recently. It's our recommendation that you rezone these because the net benefits you get from a hospital or a hospital district compared to other potential uses are not serving your highest and best use.
So is it fair to make the assumption that if we were to change from a hospital district designation into a commercial zoning, that the next time, however far in the future that may be, that property is looking to turn over, all of a sudden the property owner themselves are potentially looking at a larger market within which to
Absolutely.
to sell the property?
Yeah, so
So arguably the property becomes more valuable.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And it becomes more valuable to them, but it also becomes more valuable to you.
And that's what I guess the
Yeah.
emphasis being on more valuable to us, which obviously translates not just into potential sales tax, but absolutely would help the city potentially in ad valorem.
You're looking at property, you're looking at sales and other things that go along with that. So,
Thank you.
couple other recommendations here. One recommendation we would make is to consider adding a mixed use zoning option, so MU zoning option to the list of zoning options. That's really I don't want to say popular, but that's something you see right now. Everybody wants to go to mixed use zoning. Everybody wants mixed use development. Something, for example, on larger hospital properties, mixed use makes more sense. You could still have some medical within mixed use, but it also gives you the option to have retail, restaurants, and other uses in that same category there.
So just kind of going back to the previous question, then what I'm kind of taking away from this is the greater level of optionality that we can provide, development optionality that we can provide.
Sure.
The greater value it is, not just to the property owner, but also to the community at large.
Absolutely. The other thing to look at, and I'm going to talk about here in a second, but is depending on the property, and I'm not recommending this for the entire quarter, but there are certain properties where you could go multi-level with the way that some of the current zoning is right now would not allow you to do that. So something like a mixed-use zoning would allow you to do some of that. And actually, by going vertical, you're increasing your opportunity to, again, property tax, sales tax, and those sort of things. So, and really, with the limit, again, this is not I'm just gonna say we're Dripping Springs, like where I live, where we have land to develop. You either have to go up or
Don't do it.
It's basically the only way, or one of the very few ways that the city of Rollingwood could actually grow the size of its pie. So
absolutely. So, and then we talked about this one already, but consider combining C1 and C2 zoning into just an overall commercial zoning. There's very little difference between C1 and C2. That would be our recommendation. I think I've got two more slides here real quick. So those were looking at specific zoning recommendations. I want to talk about just some community and economic development recommendations real quick. Due to the shallow properties along bee caves, multi-level developments, we just talked about that, going vertical should be the focus going forward. Consider providing incentives to those property owners and or developers who develop properties this way. That's something we see in communities in similar situations. I'm not a huge fan of incentivization, but it works well in situations like with this, where
where a tenant is looking, or a landlord or property owner is looking at full occupancy, and you're trying to encourage them to forego immediate revenues for a larger, potential larger boon at the end.
Yeah. The other recommendation we would make is, in most cases, consider focusing that multi-level development on to the south side, due to the north side backing up to a lot of residential spaces.
I suspect there's a lot of residents in our community that would be very happy to hear that.
Absolutely. So that would be our recommendation. But really, the only way you're going to really capitalize on these new zoning options, be able to capitalize on really many of these properties going forward, is going to have to be vertical development.
Thank you.
2 or 3 more recommendations. Pay close attention to properties along MOPAC. This is for the city of Rollingwood and also the RCDC that go up for sale or have had a recent change of ownership. With very few properties here, it's very important that you're paying attention to that. I think we talked about there is a staff person that's keeping track of that, paying attention to that. Just a change of ownership, bottom line, can have a huge impact on this community for years to come. So building a relationship, understanding what properties are available is going to be key. One thing I wanted to recommend was consider hosting, I called it a Rollingwood commercial exchange or some kind of other event. I said to hold them quarterly or, every 6 months, something like that, where you're engaged with the real estate community, you're engaged with property owners, so that you're hearing what's going on. You're understanding, let's say there is a property owner that has decided they're going to retire, they want to get rid of their business or sell their property. You want to be in on that, so that if there are potential prospects coming to the city that have been here, you maybe have a chance to kind of
have the discussion to make sure that they understand what the immediate community perceives its needs to be.
Absolutely.
Fair.
And then last, I keep saying last, I guess I have more slides than I thought I did, but focus on retailer and developer recruitment. Now, this might sound silly to some, but with what we just talked about, and really there being a lack of available properties here, you still have to focus on retailer and developer recruitment. The reason I say that, again, a lot of these properties have tenants that are leasing on monthly leases or on yearly leases. There's an opportunity to get better benefits from bringing in other tenants if that works. So consider that. I actually think you should consider attending or being present at some of the International Council of Shopping Centers conventions. The one in Fort Worth, and there's also an event called Retail Live in Austin. Even though there might not be a tremendous amount of property available right now, something could pop up next week. Having a relationship, being in front of these potential retailers and developers could play a key role in this. Okay. Y'all are working on this next recommendation, but maintain those gateway entrances into Rollingwood. I will tell you, as somebody that I had family that grew up in South Austin. I live in Dripping Springs now. I'll be honest. Until a couple of years ago, I didn't know Rollingwood.
Okay. I'm sure we have a lot of residents that live in Rollingwood.
Exactly. So,
sure.
And same thing with the addresses along Beef Graves Roads. Many of those are Austin or Westlake addresses. So that makes things tough. However, with this new marketing campaign you're going through, like with the new logo and all of that, that looks really awesome. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're maintaining those gateway entrances into town. We want people to know when they're coming into Rollingwood and when they're leaving. You want them to understand that. But part of that is making sure you maintain those attractive landscaping, curb appeal with what you can do. I mean, you have limitations based on some of those things there. But retail prospects, much like businesses and industrial prospects, they like to see communities that take pride in their appearance and invest in making it appealing as possible. Y'all do that. Continue to focus on the branding for Rollingwood and really creating that place, which you have. Wayfinding is part of that, and I know that's some of the things you're working on right now. So I wanted to encourage that. Some of the other things that I was going to mention, try to take advantage of your location, Zolker Park, the possibility to tie in some of these properties, which if you dive into this a little bit deeper, you'll see that we identified the opportunity with Zolker Park, and is it Delana Lane?
Yeah.
That runs back through there. I think there's a way to get some hike and bike and bicycle trails through here to kind of interact with some of the shopping centers and restaurants there, and I think that's something y'all might have talked about in the past. So we'd recommend kind of continuing that. That'll help with you have some congestion issues in your shopping centers as it relates to parking and maybe not adequate parking for some of these shopping centers. You would be able to relieve some of that and also get more visitors in based off of that. So
potentially a larger tie into the park that the city also owns.
Absolutely.
Back there.
So again, wayfinding, tying in the park. Be honest with you, I've driven down this corridor many a times. I didn't know the park was there.
Most of our residents don't know.
Exactly. So those are our recommendations. Obviously, this is just kind of a high level summary of what we looked at there. I'd encourage all of you to take a look at that Excel sheet. where we have gone through and made the specific zoning changes, recommendations. Maybe take a look at that. But like I said, we're happy to come back, speak to the Planning and Zoning Commission. We're called the retail coach for a reason, and the reason we have the name coach is we want to coach y'all on being successful through this process, and anything we can do to help just kind of make sure these things are happening, whether it's meeting with the Planning and Zoning Board, maybe it's prospects coming in or something like that. We're happy to do that going forward.
So, I think one of my first question is we've identified as a community, and I've known it for years, of businesses, denoting themselves as whatever of Austin or whatever of Westlake Hills.
Yeah.
We've kind of not really implemented a strategy necessarily to changing that, aside from really branding ourselves. I'm of a mind personally that if we as a community add a perceived value to denoting for this business to denote themselves as being of this community, that they'll do it naturally. That said, there's potential for that to kind of drag on for however long.
Sure.
Have you encountered this before in other communities, and if so, what was kind of the game plan for tackling that?
So we have. I mean, I think a lot of it is just an awareness. I think you can help with a lot of that with the branding and the wayfinding.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it ends up becoming a domino effect, and some of these, business owners and newcomers coming in will kind of catch on and go with that. I've seen communities go as far as an economic development corporation. I've seen them go as far as doing like matching grant programs, doing some kind of sign enhancement programs, to where, they put up 50%, you put up 50%, and trying to help change that.
Yeah, I think it was San Marcos, downtown San Marcos, that
They've
really
done that.
emphasized that.
Yeah.
I was talking to some folks, might have even been some of their representatives from their EDC.
Yeah.
It was a 50-50 matching program.
Yeah.
If they kind of updated their exterior and their signage to.
Yeah, so there's facade enhancement programs that a lot do, and then there's also sign enhancement or sign replacement programs. I will be honest with you, that is very common throughout the entire state of Texas, as far as economic development corporations doing that. And y'all are a 4B corporation, if I'm not mistaken, so very common for a 4B corporation.
Well, this is a tremendous amount of information. I've been asking a ton of questions. Is anybody, did I miss anything? I'm sure I missed a lot. We just totally missed a lot, yeah. But a lot of information that we've only just recently received. So no shame on anybody if they don't have immediate questions. That said,
I kind of want to go,
please.
take the opportunity while we have you here to go
Sure.
and kind of delve a little bit into, because I really appreciate the kind of property by property analysis
Sure.
that you guys did, taking a look at highest and best use, because I think that is really important moving forward as a community, and really not just envisioning kind of what we want to see there, both from the types of buildings, type of structures, but then also the type of businesses or offices, et cetera, we want to be there. But one thing I'd like you to talk a little bit about is kind of your experience, but also kind of studies showing how zoning changes and looking at zoning comprehensively for, and really what this is
Sure.
kind of almost like kind of commercial district.
Exactly.
In a larger city. It just happens to be our sole commercial
Sure.
district. But talk a little bit about how taking a look at comprehensive zoning changes and really what we're talking about in areas, upzoning areas, can help drive future development, future use, because, and one of the things I will anecdotally note before turning it over to you is one of the things that is a barrier a lot of times in doing developer work is when you see a property and you say, okay, well, this property would be perfect for a small retail center, but it's zoned office right now. So what we're gonna have to build in is the time, money, et cetera, to go through a zoning case.
Sure.
And whether or not we pull it off and how that works into our economics. But what I want to hear is kind of how that's going to help
Absolutely.
us, knowing that that's going to be playing in zonings.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the way we looked at this is and that's our background is as retailers and developers. So we came in looking at this kind of through the eyes of a retailer and a developer. What do they see if they're looking to come in here? You know, what are those opportunities? I don't have any exact kind of studies to share with you tonight, but I can put some studies together and show you some different areas. I think of a community, the urban community just outside of Denver that we worked in previously. Older area, very similar to what we have here. Came in, they kind of overhauled it. Again, for them, it was just looking at a district. It wasn't their entire corridor, but it was looking at a specific district. Commerce City is the name of the community. They were able to do that. They were able to identify properties that were not serving their highest and best use, properties that were not zoning, developed an overlay district on that area. And you go there now and it's a tale of two cities. And it's different. You've seen if you look at their sales tax, it's increased tremendously. Property taxes increased tremendously. So anytime that we look at doing this or we recommend to cities or we see cities actually do this, I can only point to successes, to be honest with you, with increased sales tax.
If you had an overlay of this zoning map that, from y'all's observations that express no matter what the zoning is, what you feel would be the highest and best use, what kind of zoning?
So that's kind of how we looked at it,
Right, okay.
was kind of just to start with. We kind of looked at it without even knowing what the zoning was, if that makes sense. We actually could put something together based off of that and kind of outline that for you and show you what that looks like.
Even like hotel or,
Yeah.
a destination.
Well, let me tell you this. And I don't know. I don't know if I'll hurt anybody's feelings or by saying this, but I look at the church. That's right at. I mean, your main and main is what I call it. And I'm all for churches. Okay, my preacher's probably watching this, and he's probably rolling over seeing this. But sometimes churches take up some of the best properties in a community. And my recommendation would be, and I have it in there, is to look at that church and what their future plans are. Many times you see churches relocate to different areas, and churches have their value, obviously, in communities. But I would look at, and one of the zoning changes that we are making a recommendation for is that church property, Park Hills Church property, and the school that goes along with it, because you look at that. I mean, that from a development standpoint, that property has millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of value. And I will tell you, if that property ever did become available, there would be, we're talking, domain style development to more of a limited scale based on the size, but mixed use development. I could see something like a boutique hotel. I could see something, retail, restaurants around that, some kind of town center type development is what I can picture there in a perfect world. So that's, when I say we looked at every property, we looked at it, even if it was a church, even if it was something else. So same thing with the hospital. Hospital serves a great value and benefit there. It's a lot of property. And, as hospitals are starting to turn into more of these micro hospitals, is there a chance to kind of build around that with a mixed use type development with the hospital maybe still having some value, having a spot in there, but maybe changing that up to, from that standpoint.
I think it'd be helpful and I appreciate you bring up that Denver example, but I think it'd be helpful to see some examples of success stories where you have, because I have lived here and used to live over in the Spyglass Apartments in the early 90s when I was in law school. So I drive over here and, a lot of the same buildings and businesses that were there are the same in the same buildings that are here. And I think there's some of the buildings that are a little tired. And I think if there's an incentive and taking a comprehensive look at incentivizing, some redevelopment in a smart way, and using the rezoning process as a way to really incentivize some smart redevelopment the way we want it. I think to understand how other communities have done it, I think would be a huge asset.
So I'll put together some completely agree with what you said about smart redevelopment, because that's your opportunities here are redevelopment opportunities. Right. So being smart in how that's done, I'm gonna put together a list of some successes here in the region, and then also looking at some other areas that are similar what we worked in, like in Washington State and some others that really tie in the hike and bike trails and those sort of things. I mean, look at South Congress, look at South Lamar and those areas, and you've seen those change over time. At some point, and I'm not saying Bee Caves Road is going to turn into that,
Sure.
but you've seen that evolution happen. And that's a great example of maybe some example of what new types of development look like compared to what you have here now.
But I also think of areas like, kind of McKinney and Knox.
Absolutely, yeah.
In Dallas with the Katy Trail coming
Yeah.
in, hike and bike opportunities tying into a lot of the businesses there. But that's another area where they've had to make some decisions about allowing some vertical relief and everything else to incentivize a little bit more density.
Absolutely. And what you're able to do with going vertical with increased sales tax, you're able to do some really awesome things. I mean, adding more amenities for the people that live here. Adding,
Well, one of the big aspects I think that really is interesting is the concept of the mixed use. What it will allow any number of folks in our community to do at that point is to kind of downsize, these empty nesters and folks that they faced one of two options. Take the value out of their property and
Sure.
and kind of live their best life after raising their family, and leave the community with a mixed use. Best of both
Options.
worlds, right? So
Yeah.
that's
and
not.
I mean, you're seeing that. I mean, everywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
well,
just-
I'll
yeah.
tell you what, we've seen almost we've seen 30% turnover in our population over the course of the last 6 years, and I'd love to think that if there was an option to have retained any number of those families in our community, that we'd still have some pretty powerful voices that help create a community we all wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
So being able to provide that optionality, I think, would just not just be good for our community, but obviously good for our bottom line at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, if there's any other questions, y'all know how to get a hold of us, and we'll be back in front of you and want to help any way we can in this process going forward. But if there's any other questions, if y'all want to shoot those over to, I guess maybe Amber, I'll try to answer those. I'll work on getting those a couple of case studies that are similar, and I'll send those out here soon also.
Aaron, what would you say are the two biggest takeaways from, like, the most important things that you learned from yours?
So, I mean, honestly, the most important thing is y'all need to update this zoning as quick as possible, because looking at, I went back and looked at how often these properties change hands. You'd be surprised how many times some of these shopping centers have changed hands just within the last few years. And a lot of it is investment properties. A lot of out-of-state owners is what I noticed. Where they'll buy those properties for investment reasons, but then they'll flip them as the market goes up or down, depending on that. So number one is that. Number two, I learned a lot, to be honest with you. I mean, look at me as kind of an outsider, not knowing much. I mean, I'd been to the Chinatown restaurant for lunch a couple of times, but there's a lot more to this community than I knew, and I think that's the case for a lot of the people in this area. The location with Zolker Park and those sort of things, to me was a big takeaway. Is how do we capitalize on that, because that's such a huge market there that is literally a hop, skip, and a jump away. That I think that's the key.
Building on that concept, you noted 36,000 visits to our park in a given year, with 4.5 times roughly.
Yeah, and at least 36,000. Yeah.
Of our at least 36,000, with at least 4.5 times what our actual city population is.
Yeah.
How can we as a community capitalize on that? And the reason I say that is ultimately what that spells out to me is, and we have a community park, but it's intended to be a community gathering place. The community is obviously much larger than just our city, as we've talked about today. But how do we encourage 75 to 80% of the people that visit our park to help
Sustain it.
sustain what is being supplemented by
So-
20 to 25% of the current use.
So one of the things I
Current
noticed
users.
is that a lot of those park visitors, and the park's busy. The park was busy right now when
Sure,
I drove
yeah.
by. Baseball practice going on and other things. One of the things that's happening is these visitors to the park are coming to the park, but they're not utilizing. Many of them are not going to the restaurants. They're not going to the retail around here. A lot of the retail and restaurants close early here. So if there was a way to tie in and get them to actually utilize these other retailers and restaurants, the sales tax that you would garner from that, more usage there could be used to help with some of those things. I've got some similar communities that I've worked with that have a similar situation with a park that's shared use and those sort of things. Let me go back to them and see what they've done to kind of help, because I mean, again, 8.6 thousand visitors that are utilizing that park.
That could be a potential, that's a huge boon.
It really is.
And I saw some information in some of the drafts that we had talked about that also suggested that those 36,000 visits account for an average stay of 102 minutes. That's a
Yeah.
fairly long time to stay in a
It
park.
is.
And the majority, if memory serves, came from home, and the majority went home after.
Yep.
But the next biggest demographic for where they went after were presumably restaurants.
They were outside of the city limits.
Yeah, right. So you're welcome. You're welcome, Honeyham. Pretty much all of our ball players go to you after. And Pinkberry.
Could you pull up that slide again?
Sure.
Austin's Pizza.
And Austin's Pizza.
And also, I think it has a lot to do with curb appeal, and I think you touched on it by saying that, David, that the building's retired. I mean, if you're driving through, you pretty much aren't looking because there's nothing there that draws you to it. And when you do see it, you're like, oh my gosh,
Well,
sometimes.
and I only say that because a lot of the buildings were already
Yeah.
fairly established buildings when I was here in the early nineties, and, fast forward 30 years later, I mean, a lot of the buildings were built in the 70s and 80s.
Part of our code at the time required minimum setbacks from the road. Can you give us a little bit of information? You and I discussed it briefly. The potential benefits, at least the perceived benefits, of having the actual retail location closer to
Yeah.
the
So.
street rather than setback.
And you'll find that in our report, but the
Okay.
setbacks are an issue
Yeah.
here, and taking a look at that,
Yeah.
and especially for redevelopment that's going to take place here, really looking at what those setback requirements are, better visibility.
That's
A lot of people don't know you've got some really awesome businesses here
Yeah.
and really awesome restaurants, but if you're just the average passerby going by, you don't know half of that stuff is there, to be honest with you. So. Especially even where some of the signage is placed and where it was required to be placed is, I would say, not the ideal location. So
there are a couple of things that I would say to that. First, we have styled ourselves and we're making conscientious efforts to move ourselves away from a pass-through.
Sure.
Historically, we've kind of encouraged people to usher from one side of our city to the other. And thank you very much for not stopping.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that doesn't help us pay the bills. How do you, and I guess the other aspect, moving those properties, especially on the north side of Bee Caves, is actually a net benefit to our homeowners.
Yep.
As it provides an additional cushion between our retail and our residential, or our commercial and our residential. How do we, in your experience, how do we kind of fish in that pond and kind of encourage these guys to? How do we pull them out of that stream?
Well, I think if you were to talk to some of these property owners, some of the property owners that I've talked to haven't talked to the city in 30 years. Maybe not 30 years, but haven't talked to the city about certain things related to this.
Your quarter,
in
what you
years.
mentioned, the kind of the quarterly get together.
That exactly.
Okay.
And kind of getting everybody on the same page. Especially if they're an out-of-state property owner. They might visit here once a year, if that.
Yeah.
So they're not understanding you know, what's really going on there. So I think part of that could help.
Presumably, do they have local management representation?
Yeah, most of them do. A couple of them are using a management company out of it's either Westlake Hills or Bee Cave, and then a few others. Yeah.
Were you able to garner contact information for our?
I've got
retail?
most of them. Yes.
And is that
It's
Very
not
good.
in the report, but we'll send that to you. Yeah, and I mean I think even as simple as an email saying, hey, we know you're the management company, or we know you're the owner of this property. We just wanted to, you know, introduce ourselves to you, let you know is there anything we can do to help, those sort of things. I think that just kind of garnering some goodwill with them, I think would go a long way.
I think we'd definitely be interested in doing that, and even providing a newsletter of sorts, kind of talking about initiatives in the city and,
Sure.
and initiatives undertaken by the RCDC.
And I have a quick question following on that. So, to be clear, was it your recommendation that the RCDC kind of be the conduit and the hub and the liaison, if you will, between the city and these, either the property owners or the businesses themselves?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what an economic development corporation is created for, or why they exist, I mean, a lot of that kind of ties into the economic development. I mean, you don't have a staff person, obviously, with this position, so maybe, you know, partnering with the city, if you will, on that,
Oh,
so that there
absolutely.
is that one point of contact. I think that's key, is having, you know, really one point of contact for this type of work that we're talking about, so they're not having to, let's say they do want to make a change to their property, you know, having one point of contact, having somebody they can talk to that can really help them through the process, I think is key.
So that might fall under our item 4, with discussion of professional service agreements between RCDC and the city of Rollingwood. Is that fair to say, council? That kind of concept?
Yes, certainly.
Thanks. Well, if there's nothing else from the board, Aaron, thank you so much for taking
Absolutely.
the time putting
Thank
all
you.
this together.
Yep.
Obviously, this isn't a one and done thing. This
Sure.
is an ongoing relationship, as we discussed when we first undertook this project. Thank you very much. I have no doubt that as we both ingest and digest this information, that it's can lead to a lot more questions.
Absolutely.
Look forward to continued work with you.
Sounds good. Y'all have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to call up item 4, assuming there's no other discussion on item 3. Discussion and possible action on an agreement for professional services by and between the Rollingwood Community Development Corporation and the City of Rollingwood. So just for context, last meeting, what we discussed is the fact that it is pretty commonplace for an EDC to have, I think we were referring to it as an ASA, Administrative Services Agreement, with the city. I'm not married to that nomenclature. If we want to deviate, don't care. But that's how we were referring to it at our last meeting. We had tasked our council with taking a first swipe at drafting that. I can also report that the same was put in front of the city council for discussion, and the value was noted. So from that, item 4, there's your context. In your packet, you have an agreement for provision of professional services between the City of Rollingwood and the Rollingwood Community Development Corporation. Charlie, would you mind just giving us some very high-level background on this?
Well, I don't have a copy of it, and
Okay.
and
Pull it up.
also, you know, most of this is policy driven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Other than the fact that legally we have to, I know you said it's a lot of cities do it.
We're legally required to
You're
have it.
legally required.
Sure.
If the city's going to provide you any services,
Yeah.
you are legally required to pay the city for those services, because the city under the statute is specifically prohibited from giving anything of value to the corporation, which would include the time and energies of the employees and staff and such. And so this is intended and so with that in mind, the appropriate way to do that is through an agreement between the corporation and the city that lays out what services are going to be provided to the corporation and at what price. And that's what this is supposed to do. And I've drafted many of these, so I just drafted a fairly simple one and then provide it to staff to sort of fill in, what services would be provided, and then y'all can determine what's the appropriate pricing for that.
Perfect. And the way this is drafted, is this something, when we being RCDC adopted our budget in this last meeting, remind me, was it 80,000 or 88,000?
88,000.
88,000 is what we had budgeted for with regards to this specific agreement. Do we have to, is there functionality in this agreement where we would have to have a special undertaking every year if that number is to change?
Yes, this is an annual agreement, so every year.
So every year during our budgeting process, we would undertake this?
The negotiations with the city for purposes of price associated with the services to be provided, yes.
Perfect, thank you very much. Amber, please. Well, you seem,
I was
gonna say, you seem
just
like you're
putting
up there waiting to fill us in on all the information.
No,
Just
no,
here
sir.
for questions.
Just doing the PowerPoint for you all, so you can see the agreement in front of you.
Perfect, so if we could take it, can you scroll to item 2, please?
Yes.
As I understand it, that is the only moving piece that needs to be incorporated. Is that correct?
Correct.
And as I mentioned before, we adopted a budget last month whereby we budgeted 88,000.
That's not really right.
Is it not? Okay.
The 88,000 included park maintenance. This is for management.
Oh,
There's
so
a difference.
So we're not going to be spending money on park maintenance
that's correct.
with any EDC funds?
We're actually
We'll talk about that a little later.
Okay.
we're statutorily prohibited from providing.
Yeah, actually,
We've been
that's
doing
close, but that I recognize that.
Okay.
That's close. That's a close statement, but it's not completely accurate.
Okay.
You're not statutorily prohibited from it. The statute doesn't authorize it.
Got it. Okay. Thank
Two
you.
The statute says for park projects.
Yes, and
Okay.
I'm
Maintenance
happy to
can be a
read.
project.
No, it cannot.
It's a difference of opinion.
Well,
Is
later this evening, when I go through the projects, we'll read what the statute says,
Okay.
and then I'll explain why
So I tell you
it's
what,
a pretty
maybe
common opinion amongst
maybe what
ED
we'll do.
lawyers.
Sorry to interrupt you, Charlie, but maybe what we'll do is let's put 4 back into the hopper and instead call up item 5.
Sure.
Informational presentation by RCDC Legal Counsel Charlie Zeck regarding Charles Zeck. You got fancy in this one.
I don't know. Is that what it says?
Regarding Type B Economic Development Corporations.
Sure. All right. So I'm not fully sure of everybody's level of knowledge with respect to economic development corporations. So I'm going to sort of start at just a sort of overview of sort of how they got created, and then.
I was going to say, for my sake, would you drop us to novice?
Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sure. Absolutely. So Texas legislature quite a while ago authorized cities to create economic development corporations. They used to be referred to, well, now I can't remember what they used to, that's a good thing. They used to be referred to as not type A and type B, but something else. And now I'm glad I can't remember that because I was old enough to remember. But once it got codified, they were deferred to as type A and type B corporations. And there are 2 different types of corporations. Originally, they were only created for purposes of basically primary job creation, industrial development type projects and things of that nature. And then George Bush wanted to build a baseball stadium. And when that happened, there were some changes made to the statute to authorize different types of projects. And the statute's been tweaked here and there, and powers have been given and powers have been taken away based on different things that the legislature has felt with respect to what should be authorized to be used for these tax dollars. These tax dollars are created through sales tax. Ironically, only small communities, and small community is defined as a community under 20,000, can actually use money to help generate sales tax dollars. It is otherwise very limited and not authorized for any type of retail sales development. And there's an exception for small communities such as the city of Rollingwood, and I'll go through those. Y'all are a type B corporation. And so let me back up. So you can only spend the money on a project as that is defined within the statute specifically, and then where there's a question and it's been interpreted by the Texas Attorney General. And there's a few of those out there. A type B corporation can do any project that a type A corporation can do. Honestly, most of your type A corporation projects, I don't think the city of Rollingwood is going to want to do. I'm not going to go in them through detail, but I am going to read just the headings of the projects.
Where you at, Charlie? I'll pull it up here.
I'm at 501.101.
Can't watch that, that'll make me dizzy.
So the first type of project is a project related to the creation or retention of primary jobs. And there's a list of the types of primary jobs that you can use it for. And so the funds have to be used to create those or retain those primary jobs. And there's an entire list of them, everywhere from manufacturing and industrial facilities, research and development facilities, military facilities, transportation facilities, sewage or solid waste disposal facilities, and others. But is for primary job creation or retention only. The next are projects related to job training.
This is for 4A.
This is for a type A. Yeah, there you go.
Type A,
4A.
4A.
It used to be 4A because it was in section 4 of the statute, and it used to be 4B because it was in section 4B of the statute. Certain infrastructure improvement projects. And so if you are a type A community, this is one of the areas where you could indirectly spend money for retail services, because it authorized expenditures necessary to promote or develop new or expanded business enterprises. So that's a broader term, which could include retail sales, and allowed you to do improvements in roads and drainage and streets that would indirectly benefit and promote the expansion of or existing business development. You can also do projects related to certain military bases or missions. I don't see that as something you're going to be doing here. Career center projects outside of a junior college district, also don't think. Airport facilities or other projects by corporations authorized by certain border municipalities, not applicable. And infrastructure projects by corporations authorized by municipalities in certain border communities. So as you can see, a type A project is basically a primary job creation situation, which is not something that I think the city of Rollingwood's type B corporation is probably going to be engaging in. And so then the other things that a type B corporation can do are those other projects that are listed in the statute under chapter 505. So we're going to go to 505. Just go up to the 501, type in a 5, and then hit return, and it should take you right to 505.
An extra one in there.
You put a 1 in. Yeah, that doesn't exist. That chapter doesn't exist.
There we go.
So subchapter D of 505, which starts at 505.151, talks about authorized projects for a type B corporation. The first is those types of projects authorized under 501, which are the type A projects. So 505.152 are the projects related to recreational or community facilities. And I'm just going to read it because that's the one y'all seem to be using quite a bit. For purposes of this chapter, project includes land, buildings, equipment, facilities, and improvements found by the Board of Directors to be required or suitable for use for professional and amateur sports, including children's sports, athletic entertainment, tourist, convention, and public park purposes and events, including stadiums, ballparks, auditoriums, amphitheaters, concert halls, parks and parks facilities, open space improvements, museums, expedition facilities, and related store, restaurant, concession, and automobile parking facilities, related area transportation facilities, and related roads, streets, and water and sewer facilities, and other related improvements that enhance any of the items described by this section. Notice it doesn't say maintenance of those facilities. It only says the land, the buildings, the equipment, the facilities, and improvements. And so capital improvements is what this section has always been intended to do. Building a ballpark, building the stadium, building the ball fields, putting in improvements that will enhance those things, putting in other types of things that enhance them, capital improvements, but not ongoing annual.
So like if we artificial turf the field or something, that's
That would be,
that's an improvement.
that's an
versus-
improvement that you could spend these funds on, absolutely. But spending money to mow the fields or to trim the bushes is not a listed project under this. It's gotta be a capital improvement project that improves or enhances the types of things that are listed in
And
here.
if you switched out the grass every year, I mean, that's just like devil's advocate here. Is that something that is like a capital project? Like if we went from Bermuda to St. Augustine, like every other year? I mean,
Yeah, I would defer that decision making to this board because that's, I
Yeah.
mean, I see that as, that type of question is I see it in a
Yeah.
gray area.
Yeah.
And you as the board, so long as you're not arbitrary and capricious in your decision making,
Yeah.
you're gonna have some discretion there are gonna be a few black and white things,
Yeah.
but there are gonna be some other things that are gonna be in that gray area where you're gonna have pretty broad discretion in making that decision. And I say I follow that up with as long as city council approves.
Right.
Yeah.
Because city council ultimately has to approve all of your expenditures, projects, and programs. And so they would also have to be on board with it. But you would have some pretty broad discretion, in those gray areas. So I, if this board thinks so,
I have no idea.
I'll give you
Just
some
trying to
advice,
think of
but
the
yeah.
kind
But
of creative.
I know you were just
questions we're gonna
you were
get.
just pulling something, right,
So,
yeah.
there's also a notice procedure, right? When we
Right, I was gonna go through all that too.
Okay.
I was gonna
Yeah,
just
sorry,
go
don't
through the
mean to skip
projects
ahead.
first
Yep.
and then through the process.
Thank you.
So, the other one is projects related to affordable housing. I don't think y'all are gonna be doing that. Projects related to water supply facilities and water conservation programs. Projects related to business enterprises that create or retain primary jobs. Projects related to business enterprises in certain municipalities. This applies to certain municipalities that have not, in the preceding 2 years, received more than $50,000 in revenues from sales and use taxes. And if you've received more than that, then
We
it's,
exceeded
yeah, so that's not applicable.
that. Does it define projects in the statute?
You mean, well, yes, each one is defined. So projects related to affordable housing is one that I just
No,
read.
the term projects, does it define that in the statute?
Yes, it defines it in each section. So, projects related to recreational and community facilities. For purposes of this chapter, project includes land buildings.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. And in some of these, it uses different language than in others. For example, let's just skip ahead to the small city exception, which would allow you to spend money for sort of retail sales if you wanted to. That's 505.158. That says for a type B corporation authorized to be created by a municipality with a population of 20,000 or less, project also includes land, buildings, equipment, facilities, expenditures, target infrastructure, and improvements found by the corporation's board of directors to promote new or expanded business development. Notice there's two other listed types of projects that weren't listed in the parks. Expenditures, you don't see the word expenditures in the first one that I read to you. And targeted infrastructure, you don't see targeted infrastructure listed in the first one that I read you. So each one defines project a little differently. And so you can spend money, give land or buy land or build buildings or, purchase equipment or facility or anything, any of those things, so long as this board finds that the expenditure or the project will promote new or expanded business development. And that's sort of the broad umbrella that smaller cities have that allows them to do things like some smaller communities will do what's called a storefront renovation project, where they'll assign a certain amount of money to, and then set up a process and procedure where the businesses can come in and get grants to improve their store facade, right? And that's for purposes of promotion, new and expanded business enterprises.
So going back to your earlier question, or earlier point then, just so I can get clarity here, because this is a little bit new to me, kind of the statute, but when I think maintenance, I think status quo, and in no way in my mind can I justify status quo as bringing in something new, because it's status quo. It's maintenance, right?
Yeah.
It's ongoing support.
Yeah, and I think that's an accurate statement. This statute is mostly intended to allow for capital improvement type projects, either for primary job creation or something else.
And conceptually, is it safe to assume that kind of the parks and the public spaces were brought into the fold because that, especially in a smaller community, that's going to be one of the drivers, as we even discussed this evening. It actually brings those facilities bring people into the community with the presumption then that maybe they're going to influence and have a positive impact on our
Retail sales.
Yeah, and the other thing is, with parking, I mean, I haven't read the entire legislative history of these. Obviously, that particular one was we can spend money on stadiums and stuff, right?
Sure.
Ballpark.
Well,
Ballpark.
and the
Exactly.
downside of that is the Rangers are still grossly inferior to the Astros.
Hey now.
Without
I've always been that way.
without commenting, I would say that I think parks and open space got put in there because like big industries, people like Google, Amazon, and other types of big business folks that want to bring in employees. Parks and open space is a quality of life issue, and so they're looking for those quality of life amenities, so that when they do locate their headquarters here or their businesses here, their employees can then live in the community and also enjoy the benefits of those amenities. So I think
it's not an attenuated step to presume that when you enhance these aspects, it necessarily enhances the overall economy of the area.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
And so just to sort of continue commenting on the business development in certain small cities, the only caveat to that is if the expenditure is going to be more than $10,000, the city council has to adopt a resolution and hold 2 readings of that resolution before you can actually expend the funds.
And so that's the process that you and I talked about.
That's a process for that particular section.
Okay.
There's a broader process that is in the next section down, 505.159. Except as provided by subsection B, which I'll read to you in a second, a Type B corporation shall hold at least one public hearing on a proposed project before spending money to undertake the project. B says a Type B corporation, the creation of which was authorized by a municipality with a population of less than 20,000, that's the city of Rollingwood, is not required to hold a public hearing under this section if the proposed project is defined by subchapter C, chapter 501, which is a Type A corporation project. All right? And then there is another provision that is in section 501 that here it is, 505.160. A Type B corporation may not undertake a project under this chapter unless not later than 60th day after the date notice of the specific project or general type of project is first published. The governing body, the authorized municipality, receives a petition from more than 10% of the registered voters of the municipality requesting that an election be held before the specific project or general type of project is undertaken. So this section is the section that we were probably talking about earlier, Mayor, where if if you decide to do a project, once you publish that project, you have to wait 60 days before you spend the funds to give the opportunity for the citizens to present that petition. That's correct. And there's an exception to that that we would deal with, and that's basically if the voters had previously approved undertaking that specific project or general type of project, and that can happen. I think I hit everything I kind of wanted to hit, which is mostly just making sure y'all understood that there is a process that is required to go through, that you're going to spend funds, and that we do need to look at the statute very specifically with respect to our authority on how to spend your Type B project dollars.
Can we look at the park as a business development type entity for the community?
I certainly think that if there are a variety of ways
That allows
that you can spend your money under this statute, the small business one is one, and
which is more flexible, small business.
well, it depends on what you want to do. The small business one is definitely more flexible because except that every expenditure you're going to have a finding that says what we're doing is promoting new and expanded business enterprises. That this dollar expenditure will promote the creation of new business or retain business. You have to have that finding.
Well,
So that gives you,
if it enhances the traffic at the park, and the traffic at the park, some of them go shop at Trader Joe's or Panera or whatever, that would be enhancing the business activity.
y'all get to put your name on those findings, and y'all get to raise your right hand and say,
I'm just saying.
I testify that I firmly believe this is the outcome. Y'all get to do that.
Yeah.
I just tell you the law.
All right.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
But
sorry, go ahead.
did I fully answer your
Yeah,
question? I
you
want to make
did,
sure.
yeah.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions on or for council on this? Charlie, thank you very much for walking us through it. Always appreciate it. I can almost assure you that we will want you to do that again as we go forward. If I could then be so bold as to call item 4 again, discussion and possible action on an agreement for professional services by and between the Rollingwood Community Development Corporation and the City of Rollingwood. As we discussed last month, we budgeted and approved a budget whereby we allocated $88,000 to, in a line item,
For maintenance.
No, not for maintenance. For administration and administrative services provided by the City of Rollingwood. I will be the first to tell you that we will definitely want to see from the City of Rollingwood a justification for not just $88,000, but for each and every dollar that is potentially allocated there. But with regards to that, am I right to say that if we adopted this administrative services agreement, professional services agreement today, and we had inserted into item 2 the amount of $88,000 in accordance with our adopted budget, that there would be some level of truing up at the end of the year. This is not necessarily a check to be written, or is it?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would have to defer to staff. Cities do it, quite honestly, most cities just figure out, okay, what is the level of the cost of service?
Okay.
And that's a negotiated number, and it's just a flat number.
And that's how this
That's
is
the way,
built out.
that's the way it's set up in that agreement.
And that's why it's set up this way, because almost every city does it that way.
Okay.
It's
And-
just flat fee.
Don't forget, you could change your budget. The 88 was kind of
If-
matching previous years.
If we were to change our budget, after adopting this agreement, we would also need to work with the city to amend this agreement.
Right. So if you wanted to pick an amount lower than what is currently budgeted for, we could bring a budget amendment back at the next meeting to reflect the contract.
I see what you're suggesting. Got it.
And the other thing about, I think your point about, tracking costs and everything else, and there's the benefit of both the city and the RCDC in that if we say, okay, we budget 8,000, and when they look at staff time spent, the value of that and everything else, if it's out of whack, and doesn't match up, since it's an annual agreement that needs to be renewed, it'd be important to know if we're missing the mark, particularly if we're not allocating enough to take care of the administrative costs, et cetera.
So glad that you said that, because it's very important that we try to actually come close to matching what the actual cost is, so in order to be in compliance with the city not giving anything of value to them.
And we do have to report to the state, how much we spend in each approved category every year.
So with that discussion being had and making sure that we're not shorting on what we would anticipate the administrative burn, if you will, to be, certainly ahead of our next couple of meetings to give the city adequate runway. Do you have a suggestion on how we might supplement item 2 tonight, knowing that we both can and maybe will go back and amend at a later date?
I don't have, I'd like to work with Able to make sure that we can justify what you would put in there.
Okay. So with that, is it safe to say then that maybe we adopt this to form, knowing that we'll bring it back probably next month for a more detailed, execution, I suppose?
Right.
I think that's a good idea. That way, that gives staff an opportunity to figure out exactly what the cost is going to be based on historical use, and then that way we can make sure we're comfortable with a firm number.
Sounds good.
Or we can go off of the budget that we were given, like the breakout when the council did it.
Sure.
I think the administrative part on our side was clearly defined.
And I'll be honest with you, I've slept since we adopted that budget. I think that's probably a pretty sound approach, at least to get started. And then I've got a lot of faith in Abel's competency to put some really solid numbers together for us. I tell you what, with that discussion, then I'll move to adopt the agreement for professional services by and between Rollingwood Community Development Corporation and the City of Rollingwood as to the form presented this evening, and subject to a later determination of exact amounts for both item 2 and item 4.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion? Directors, not hearing any. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, and thank you, council and Amber. Really appreciate it. That's the last thing we have on the agenda. Assuming nobody wants any of the items called back up, I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Fantastic.
Wow, that was a nice meeting.
Yeah, one of the things I'll add on to Charlie's discussion is actually the comptroller's office has a pretty good breakdown summary. I read that sort of stuff all day at work and get down into the nitty gritty. It's, most of my stuff's federal. I get into the state stuff
Okay, all
occasionally.
right, all
but-
right. Yeah, so you're used to it.
Yeah, so I'm used to it. So when I'm away from that, I like to be able to pick up stuff that's pretty easily understandable, but the comptroller's office really has a kind of good summary on that really kind of gets into the authorities well, and a lot of the nomenclature, that's pulled from there. And I think that's gonna be one of the important things that we key on as a group, is really making the finding, the proper findings. When we approve projects, that they're gonna be, targeted projects, for, targeted infrastructure improvements, et cetera. And use the correct nomenclature from the authorizing statute to
Yeah.
authorize what we're doing. And I think as long as we do that,
You'll be fine.
I have a
we'll
question.
straighten
Is
it
it
out.
okay to get paper copies of the agenda? I miss not having the copies of the agenda and being able to make notes just with.
Do the whole packet or the agenda only?
We don't really need the minutes or that type
They're on
thing.
the- Yeah, they're on the desk.
Oh, I didn't know we had them.
Don't,